When you live in New York City as a queer person, you often forget how lucky you are. It's the mecca of LGBTQ culture that trumps the average queers per capita across the rest of the country, with over 750,000 gay residents. I'd like to think that's because New York City operates as a judgment-free space where people are encouraged to be their authentic selves. And despite the generally complicated nature of that self-discovery process, authenticity lends itself to free expression of opinions. And due trust, another record high per capita statistic of New York City is that people are opinionated and will fight to the death to live by their values they believe in. And this reality was never more apparent than my time in Queertopia, a modern Bushwick mansion, part of the first wave of gentrification, filled with a cohort of queer, polyamorous software engineers and politically charged anarchists looking to tear down the systems of capitalism. And boy, do I have a story for you in respect to Queertopia. Now, what does this have to do with small town big personalities, you ask? Well, I spent a sizable portion of my quarantine in Queertopia, splitting time between there and up here at the lake. And if I'm being totally honest, that emotional roller coaster is a huge reason why I have recorrected my path of professional purpose towards impact investing and what it actually means to form your own opinions away from groupthink and actually take action on the passion points that you preach. So without further ado, here is my story of Queertopia. Welcome to Small Town Big Personalities, a mini-series documenting the surreal journey of two New York City queers forced to move back to their small conservative hometown and face the music on self-awareness, purpose, and having impact in this world. My name is Emily Rose Gray. Let's get into it. Now, it's important to note here that my time in Queertopia was during the peak of political uncertainty, unrest, misinformation, and confusion in New York City. Trump was up for re-election. The George Floyd and Breonna Taylor protests were in full swing, and things were escalating literally every single day. A lot of polarized finger pointing going on of who is not doing enough to combat social justice. Now, this was a particularly potent topic in our sweet Queertopian haven. That house consisted of me, my partner at the time, and our other roommates who were extremely involved in this thing called Club Anarchy, aka Club A. Now, Club A consisted of a bunch of radicalized artists, intellectuals, anti-white collar, self-proclaimed anarchists whose primary focus was to organize the front lines of police protests, amongst other things. So our discussions on social thought and political theory in Queertopia was my favorite part about being there. And here's why. I am so grateful for them because they were my first true wake-up call in quarantine. Who was I? What did I stand for? I used to be an extremely passionate person and vocal about human rights. I even worked on Capitol Hill for a while in politics. But I sold out over the years and I fell asleep at the wheel, trading in my political theory major for finance and shaping my adult persona around my professional identity of working for an international bank. It felt liberating to be back in a space where what really matters was at the forefront of my awareness. I felt honored to be a part of these discussions. And it made me realize that I needed to change the way I do business and shape my career in a more meaningful way that aligns to my values. But as positive as it was getting reacquainted with conversations that actually mattered, it also was extremely problematic at times. So here is the first lesson I learned living in Queertopia. Calling out versus calling in my opinion, closes off opportunities for change. Let me explain. Despite the great conversations I was having with my roommates of Club A, I felt judged. Me and these software engineers were working remotely from the house, but my affiliation with finance set me apart. A lot of commentary of, how's capitalism today, Emily? Still hating your life, working in the cog machine? And worst of all, I hope you know that your participation is upholding the structures that oppress us. Not to mention, I wasn't vegan enough, I wasn't environmentally conscious enough, and I was not protesting enough. And I don't say these things because my feelings were hurt, but I bring them up because I fundamentally disagree with guilting someone for not conforming to a predetermined lifestyle of rebellion, without giving them any right to question how they can protest the status quo most efficiently in their lives. And so here's the difference between calling out versus calling in. When you call out, there has to be something specific that you are calling someone out for. So does this limit the way that we define and execute on positive change? Does it assume that there's only one right way of doing things? And if so, is that even practical? To me, calling in is practical. It's not warm and fuzzy. Don't get me wrong. The individual isn't going to get a gold star just for participating and listening. In fact, it's quite the opposite. The job that they must accept in truly being an impactor for change resonates in two ways. The first way, the individual must be willing to drive impact via an ego death, put themselves aside, listen to different perspectives, and yes, certainly face cold hard facts on how they were wrong or perpetuating toxic actions when it comes to fixing our socioeconomic structures. I mean, yeah, honey is sometimes more effective than vinegar, but it's not required. So those holding the torch of bringing others up to speed, like my Queertopian roommates, they don't have to sugarcoat things. They don't have to be nice when spitting hard facts, but they can reserve judgment. And that is a big difference. Because when you reserve judgment, you empower. You hand the torch over to the individual, and they can recognize the responsibility of themselves alone to figure out what things need changing, what to do with that information that they just consumed, and how they can choose to prioritize what needs to be done first, and what tools and resources do they have readily accessible to push that positive agenda forward. Only the individual can answer this. Because if they can't, that is literally just changing one cog in a machine for another, right? You're asleep at the wheel yet again, only this time, instead of following the status quo of a broken society that doesn't serve you, you are following a plan of rebellious action that limits your ability to serve the movement for change. Eventually, things just fell apart. Our perfect Queertopia where the door was always open, where conversation flowed, where values were put at the forefront of all of our actions. Everything kind of just fell apart. I ended up leaving Queertopia. I left my relationship. I left my friends. And I left this mentality of groupthink. And granted, it made me extremely motivated to go on and do my own thing, to go impact my own change, which thank God was one of the greatest lessons I learned in COVID. Ultimately, the legacy of Queertopia ended in tragedy. And in a crazy freak accident, one of our roommates died, got hit by a tractor trailer randomly one day. And when you put things into perspective, you realize that life is so short, is so valuable, is so precious. Why would you ever spend a second of it harnessing negativity towards someone? So yes, the first lesson I learned in Queertopia was to activate, was to define my own impact for change. But more importantly, the second lesson that I learned was don't ever do that in spite. Don't ever do that to prove yourself to someone. Do it because it's in your heart. Do it because you know it's right. And do it with love and compassion towards people who don't agree or respect you, because that is the best way to conduct yourself. That is the way that you attract positivity into your life, by giving out nothing but love to other people. So I dedicate this episode to them, the brave and bold Club A cohort, letting them know to keep on keeping on from yours truly. And I'll do the same. At the end of the day, we're all important. And driving forward social justice, in driving forward sustainability, in driving forward a better, productive socioeconomic world. So I'm back on. Something wasn't sitting right with me. I was talking to one of my friends and kind of recapping the episode, and I thought to myself how hard it was to capture the emotional, spiritual, mental experience of living in a queer polyamorous household. From the first time I met Sky, I was blown away at their convictions in life, at their ability to not subscribe to any societal norm that would box them in a way that is not agreeable to them. And very eloquent, managed to get a lot of really potent points across to me that I will always keep with me. But there was so much tension. There was so much intense emotions living riddled within the walls of that place. Despite the fact that I wasn't the only white collar professional in the house, I was different. I was different because I worked on Wall Street, because I worked in finance. The biggest beast. And every day, Sky would come down and say, "How's capitalism today, Emily? How's your emotional health in that setting that you despise? I hope you know that you're upholding the systems that oppress us." That takes a toll on any person. I remember the last conversation I had with Sky. They had just gotten back from a protest, and I asked them, "How was it? What's it like out there? To which they replied, who's asking? Followed by, but don't worry. You work on Wall Street. You'll be fine. You'll be safe. And as they proceeded to walk up the stairs, turns around and says, but hopefully those structures will burn faster than you could imagine. Are you threatening me? I say. Let's have a conversation about this. And we did. I opened my heart and I asked, how are we living in this house and we don't even know each other? How can we be closer? How can we feel comfortable speaking truth while also showing compassion? It was a heated discussion that I won't get into the details of. But at the end of it, I thought that we had come to some sort of agreement. We were going to work on harnessing better relationships so that we could both elevate our voices, our desire for change, and do it at our own respectful ways and pace. We hugged. And then we didn't speak. Really ever again. Elizabeth, my partner, and I had moved out of Queertopia the second time we decided to get back together. We thought removing ourselves from the toxicity of that place would heal our relationship. It didn't. But when Elizabeth got that call, that Sky was dead. That Sky and two of our other friends were driving in Florida and got hit by a tractor trailer. My heart still sinks when I think about them. I remember going back to the house, and truly, this is how I will remember Sky. The house was so beautifully done. Pictures of them all over, along with the others lost. The love in that space, power of Club A, in their union, in their grieving, in their mourning state. They were so powerful. They were so in love with each other and the cause. It was magnificent to see. And I carry them every day. I think about them every fucking day. And in the beginning, it was because I was angry. I'd wake up in the morning reminded of my frustration, my anger, my hurt towards the situation, towards them specifically, and I'd meditate on it and I'd sit on it and I'd feel it every day. And when they died, 10 times more. Imagine carrying animosity towards someone, thinking of them in angst, and then remembering that they're dead. I hate to be so morbid, but it is something that is required of us if we choose to change, if we choose to accept the challenge of defining our own destiny when it comes to impact. And this is my truth. This is the only way I know how to honor Sky is through truth. But it's also really nice because nowadays, when I think of Sky, it's not in vain. It's not in anguish or hurt anymore. It's with inspiration. They inspired me to do my part. Call me out, looking at me intensely. Do I need to show you political theory 101? Should I send you some reading material? Major. Ugh, but true. Fine, yes, send it to me. That makes me better. And every fucking thing that I do with these goals and these intentions that I talk about here on Small Town Big Personalities, I have to give credit to Sky. And I will think about Sky. And I will think about what it means to have such passion, such commitment to one's own convictions that you can do nothing but dedicate your life to it. And that is what I intend on doing. Cheers to you, Sky.